Hello, my name is Robin. Welcome to History with Robin. We're going to get started in a couple of minutes. If this is your first time joining me, I am obviously dressed in costume, and we're going to talk a little bit about who I'm dressed up as in a little bit. And we are just going to be talking about some parts of American history, actually world history a little bit too, because we're going to talk about Columbus and the European settlement. Just as a reminder, we will use the Q&A box if you have any questions. I don't think there's an option to raise your hand, but if you see that, don't click on that. Just type it into the Q&A box and I'll try to answer your question. Hi, Travis. Thanks for joining me. Okay, good. And hello, Lily. Okay, great. Well, looks like there are quite a lot of you, so we're going to get started. Hi, Sophia. And Amelia, hi. Milo, hi. Yes, William, I am dressed up as Christopher Columbus. Nice guess. Is it the hat that gives it away? I feel like it's the hat that gives it away. Okay, great. So we are gonna get started. My name is Robin. Welcome to History with Robin. Hi, guys. Thank you. Okay, so what we're gonna talk about is we're gonna talk about Christopher Columbus, me, and early European settlement. I have a slideshow. And just as a reminder, type any questions you have in the Q&A box. Okay, so here we go. Hi, Kiosha. Yes, Andrew, you are right. I did teach you about the spice route, but I was dressed up as somebody else then. Okay, great. So here we go. History with Robin. Sorry, just one second. Okay, we are going to be studying about U.S. history, Christopher Columbus to European settlement. Okay, there's me. I think I did an okay job of dressing up as him. So Christopher Columbus. So Christopher Columbus, why study him? Now, here is my first tip for studying history. And if you've seen my other webinars, this will not be new to you. But it's good to pay attention to people who are strong enough to make things happen. And that's a really good description of Christopher Columbus. We know he discovered America, but how did he make that happen? Okay, Christopher Columbus was born about 569 years ago in Italy. And you can see my little red arrow, that's where he was born. His father was a merchant who sold wool from sheep. But as a teenager, young Columbus went to sea working on a merchant ship. And when he was about 25, his ship was actually attacked near Spain and destroyed by pirates. Hi, Gayatri, welcome back. And thank you, Benjamin. Hello from Chicago. Okay, so he was attacked by pirates. His ship was wrecked. Hi, Amelia. Okay, the only way he survived was he found a large scrap of wood and he drifted safely to the shore of Spain. It's pretty crazy, right? So Christopher Columbus, he wanted to do great things. So when he was in Spain, he went to school, he studied math, he studied how to make and use maps, he studied how to navigate ships when out of the sight of land. So a lot of the ways that they would navigate their ships is they would have to be seeing the land in order to figure out the navigation and figure out which way to make their ship go. So he practiced learning to do that without being able to see it, which if you're going to go on a long sea voyage is probably the way to do it. Hi, Ian. Yes, Elijah, Christopher Columbus did kill many Native Americans, which is one of the things we will be talking about when we get to the part about the new land. So back then, at that time, some people thought the earth was flat. So they didn't imagine that the earth was round. They actually thought it was flat. And if you went too far, you just drop right off the edge, which is kind of a funny way to think about it. Okay, thanks Milo for letting me know it's a little glitchy. Hopefully that resolves. And I'm glad that you could join us now. We're talking about Christopher Columbus. Okay, so some people thought the world was flat, but Columbus was becoming educated, and many educated people at that time had started to think that the world was round rather than flat. Actually, 1600 years, so 1,600 years before Christopher Columbus, there was a mathematician in ancient Greece who actually calculated the distance around the earth. So even that far, they knew how far it was around the earth. But in that time, that data actually got lost. That information was lost to people, which is just kind of crazy to me. And so Columbus, while he thought the earth was round, he actually thought it was much, much smaller than it was. Let's see if I can answer. I know you guys got some questions, so let me see if I can answer some of those questions. There are some people, you know, out there who still do think the earth is flat. So that is also true. But at this time, there were, I think, many, many more people that, that do think that. Okay, so Columbus is, you know, comes up with this great new idea. Oh, Milo, that's so cool that you have a coin from that far ago. It looks like there's a couple people who raised their hands. And if you want to just type your question into the Q&A box, then I'll be able to answer it. Let's see if Arabella says, did he think it was smaller because no one knew about the other continents? It is possible that that was part of the reason that he thought it was smaller. It's also just a really great example of how people can discover things from before or a long time ago, and maybe that information gets lost, maybe because it isn't written down or because it's told from one person to another, and that information just gets lost. Okay, good. So by the time he was 40, he'd come up with this great idea of how he could get to the East Indies and the Spice Islands in a short and easy voyage. Now, he wanted to do this because the Portuguese, another country, was going to the east to get to the Spice Islands to get all those spices. And he wanted to find a way to do it that was faster, that was easier, and so that he could make more money. So this was his idea. Katie asked, didn't he find America looking for someplace else? Yes, he did. He was actually trying to get to the East Indies, to the Spice Islands, to get things like pepper, ginger, cinnamon, all those things that were so, so popular at the time. And Sophia asked, why were they not very well educated? Not as many people in that time had the opportunity to go to school or actually knew how to read. And so that made it difficult to educate more people. It wasn't necessarily normal. Like now it's normal. You go to school or you do this, or you're doing school on Zoom or some other thing. That's kind of a normal, regular thing that everybody does. At that time, only a few people were able to do that. Did the person from 1600 years ago have the real measurements or an estimate? Kiosha, I think they made measurements. If I know, like what I think is that they made different measurements using the stars, and they were able to like take somewhat estimates of those so that they could do that. And why do people think the earth was round? I think it just made sense to them that it would be round. Okay, so back to Mr. Christopher Columbus. So he's got this great idea. So he is going to get to the Spice Islands by sailing west across the Atlantic Ocean. Instead of going east, having to go down around Africa and over by India and the Spice Islands, he's going to go to the west. Now, this map that I have here is kind of a funny map, right? Do you see the problem? Can you tell me what's missing? It's definitely something missing. Sorry, let me. You're right, Sophia. It was the Americas. It was North and South America. So that is actually quite a lot of land there in the middle that Columbus didn't even know existed. You guys are right. Yes, it is America. So you can see that would be a little surprising to him, right? So in 1492, he convinced the King and Queen of Spain to give him money and support his voyage to the Spice Islands. But this is what happened. He ran into some land he wasn't expecting. So that's how Columbus discovered the New World. He thought he was going to be going to the Indies, and instead he found a new world, North and South America. Let me see if I can get your questions. Yep, you're right. Alete says he thought there was only his continent. So he thought by sailing west, he could sail around the world. Yes, that's very true. Yep, he ran into the Bahamas. Who supported, Andrew asked, who supported his trip to the Spice Islands? It was the King and Queen of Spain. So at the time, Portugal, who was kind of their rival, someone they were in a contest with a little bit, Portugal was sailing to the east and bringing back lots of spices and good things from the Spice Islands and from the east, and making a lot of money from it. So Christopher Columbus got this great idea, got some money, and decided to go west and discovered a whole new world. Kiosha, he did not name North and South America. It actually, America got its name from an Italian explorer called Amerigo Vespucci. And Sophia asked, did he think the world was flat? No, he did not think the world was flat. He knew it was round. He just thought it was a little bit smaller than it was. And yes, Spencer, there were American Indians already there. There were people who have lived there for a long time before Columbus showed up. Annette asked, why did he decide to go west instead of east? I think because he imagined it was just ocean. So it's a lot easier to sail through just ocean than to sail around land. So because he thought the earth was smaller than it was, that its measurement around was smaller, that he thought it would be a faster route. The Queen, Amelia asked, who was the Queen and King? I forget the King's name, but the Queen's name was Isabella. She was Queen Isabella of Spain. I am sure his parents supported him. Let's see some other questions. You guys are asking, as always, a million great questions. Oh, Evan says Ferdinand. I think you're right. I think it's Isabella and Ferdinand. Hello, Ellie. Okay. Arabella asks, did the people on the voyage with him think the world was flat? Were they forced to go on the voyage? I don't think they were forced to go on the voyage. Anybody who went on this voyage to the Spice Islands and brought back spices to Europe was going to make a huge amount of money because the spices were really, really valuable in Europe and people would pay a lot of money for them. So a lot of the explorers, I believe, did it because they wanted to explore, they wanted to find new places, but they were also interested in the money part of it and supplying the people of Europe with the things that they needed. Okay, great. So that's how he discovered the New World. And so after Columbus discovered the Bahamas, he made 3 more voyages to this New World. He visited the Caribbean islands. He visited Central America, which is the part of land that's between North America and South America, and the northern tip of South America. But he never did see what would become of the United States or Mexico. So he visited some places in this New World, but he never made it to what would be the United States or with Mexico. Adaya says the map maker named America after Americo because he gave the information on how America looked. Yes, that is true. Nice. Thank you for adding that. Okay, great. So right up until he died, Columbus actually believed that he found a route to India and not a new world. He was very convinced that that was what he had done. And so he actually, sorry, let me put this down. Sorry, guys. So he called the place that he found, the islands that he found, the West Indies, because he was so convinced that he had found the Indies in the West. Spain sent many more expeditions to explore that region. And then when they discovered that the West Indies were nowhere near the actual Indies, which was all the way on the eastern, side, people started calling the original Indies the East Indies. So that area around the Bahamas, the Caribbean, we call that the West Indies, the area where Columbus went. And then the other side is the East Indies. Okay, I've got lots of questions. Olivia asks, Vikings discovered America first, right? There are some people who believe that in 1000, the Vikings made it all the way across the Atlantic and discovered North America first. And I've read a little bit about it, and that is something that some people believe happened. Idaya, did I say your name right? Thank you for telling me how to pronounce it. Hopefully I did it right. And you're right. So the people, Katie says he called natives Indians. And that's true. The reason that he called them Indians was because he believed he found India. So the people who lived in India at that time, he called Indians. So, but he was, Arabella, you are right. He wasn't in India. He was in a new place. Good. Okay. So that's why we called those islands the West Indies. So of course, the natives, called Indians by Columbus because he thought he was in East India, already knew about the New World because after all, they were living there. And it was their ancestors who actually discovered what we consider America many thousands of years before. But still, Columbus's discovery led many European countries to begin to send settlers to this new land. So there's this new land and they want to send settlers. Aiden asks, when did the value of spices change? I believe they changed when they became more common. So usually when something is very rare or it's hard to get or you don't have a lot of it, then it costs a lot because people want it and there's not so much. Andrew, I have never been on a voyage. I've been on long plane flights, but I have never done anything that was at all like Christopher Columbus. It's pretty easy to travel for long distances today compared to what he had to do. Milo, I don't know that he found any spices there, but one of the things that they did discover was sugar cane, and which they then ended up turning into sugar. Why is he called the founder of America? Well, I think he sort of is the founder of America in the way that he ran into and sort of discovered these continents, even if he didn't see them, see North America, see Mexico. He actually was the first to sort of run into this big stretch of land that became North and South America. Arabella, I do think in the beginning, many of them thought they were in India, and maybe like Columbus, they were convinced forever that they landed in India. So if you've never been somewhere, so if these men had never been to India and you show up at some place and you think you're in India, I could imagine it would be easy to believe that you're there, because you've never been there, you've never seen it, you don't really know what it looks like. Andrew, I have not been to Spain, but I would very much like to go. Lila, what does sugarcane look like? It looks a little bit like bamboo, if you've ever seen bamboo, but instead of being thin, it's pretty thick. And inside is the material that is like the sweet material that they then put in factories, and they purify it and they process it so that it can become sugar. I am not sure. A couple people have asked me how old Christopher Columbus was when he died. And I'm not sure actually how old he was when he died, but that would be a great thing that you guys could research when we get off of this. Let's see, let's ask some people have some different questions. Do I think Columbus should be credited for discovering America? I don't know. I think it's not an easy answer. I think he should be credited for discovering a new world, because like I said before, that sort of land mass was there and he hadn't known about it. Okay, good. Many questions about Indians, which I actually am going to get to next. Let's see. Spencer asks, what year did he discover America? His first voyage was in 1492. Now there's kind of a funny rhyme that you can teach yourself that I learned. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And when I was younger, that's how I learned that sort of rhyme to know what year that was. So if that's helpful, hopefully that will help. Okay, Elijah says Christopher Columbus died at 55. Thank you for looking that up so that you could answer that question for me. Okay, on to the Indians. Okay, so Spain was the first to send settlers, which makes sense because Christopher Columbus sailed for Spain. The Indians or Native Americans weren't happy about all these settlers coming in to take their land, so there was a lot of fighting. The Indians were skilled warriors, but they were usually outnumbered the Spanish soldiers, which means there were more of the Indians that were there than the Spanish soldiers. But the Spanish soldiers had better equipment. They had guns, they had steel armor and swords, and they had horses. So that was a big advantage for the Spanish. I can see I have a couple more questions. I'm trying to click on that so that I can answer them. Arabella asked, did the Native Americans ever accept them? I do think there probably were Native Americans or tribes that were welcoming to the new settlers, and especially when we talk about Jamestown and the first Thanksgiving, we'll talk about that. But I do think if some settlers came in and they wanted to just take over or take the gold or mistreat the Native Americans, then they definitely didn't want to just allow that to happen and tried to stop it. See if I can answer any other questions. Okay, so the Spanish won most of the battles that they ended up fighting with the Native Americans and ended up settling a very large part of North and South America, which you guys can see on the little squiggly that I wrote on my map. Okay, let's see if I can answer any other questions. How many ships did he take to America? I think he took a couple each time, because you wouldn't want to just have one ship, because sometimes ships sank or you would run into trouble or a storm on the ocean and you wouldn't want to have all your people on just one. Why did he kill the Indians? I think that some people believe that Christopher Columbus and his men and the Spanish settlers killed the Indians because they were a little greedy, because they wanted the things that they had. And they believed that they were settling that land for Spain. So this is kind of a funny part of history to talk about a little bit, because depending on how you look at it, that land, those people were there on that land already. And settlers came in and said, well, this is our land before. You know, this is our land now. So it kind of gets a little bit tricky about when we talk about this, but what they felt was they felt that they were settling this land, and this land would now belong to Spain. Okay, so I had a couple of other questions down here at the bottom. Somebody asked, is the white at the bottom Antarctica? And yes, it is. The white at the top is the North Pole and Greenland. Milo, I'm not sure if they knew about Antarctica. I feel like if they didn't know about North and South America, they probably definitely didn't know about Antarctica. But that is just my belief. Okay, great. Sorry, guys, I'm just trying to get to the bottom of my questions to see if there's any other to answer. And you are right, Arabella, he went on 3 ships, the Nina, the Santa Maria, and the Pinta. Okay, great. So these are the Spanish. The Spanish ended up coming and they settled in that part. Now, what about everybody else? So we talked about the Spanish. Earlier, we talked about the Portuguese. The Portuguese were going to the east. The Spanish were going to the west. Everybody was trying to find a way to get to the Indies so that they could get those spices and claim some new lands and discover some new things. So the English and the French were looking for an easier route to Asia. But instead of going south around South America, they looked for a northern route, hoping to find a northwest passage, a route from the Atlantic Ocean through the Arctic waters of North America to the Pacific Ocean. And so they were looking for what they called the Northwest Passage. And this, I think next, this is a little map of what they imagined, how they imagined they wanted it to go. So they would come in on the right in the Atlantic Ocean, and they'd go around all these islands, and they'd go through the Arctic Ocean, and they'd pass between Alaska and Russia, and they would make it to the Pacific Ocean. And they figured that would be an easier way to do it. They were not correct about that. So that's what they were trying to do with the Arctic Ocean. So just 5 years after Columbus made his discovery, an Italian explorer named John Cabot came up with his own plan to search for a way to get the riches of Asia, go north while sailing west. So looking the start of that Northwest Passage. So Cabot convinced England's King Henry VII to support his voyage. And he said, I will do it. I will find this way for you, and I will get an easier, faster way to go to India. So Cabot's plan to find what was called the Northwest Passage to Asia. Like Columbus, he thought he'd succeed. He thought he'd do this. So you can see, I've once again cut the map so they're lined right up with each other. So he thought he was going to do this. But what Cabot actually did was run into North America like Columbus. He actually did it farther north than this. So even my arrow's not quite right, but up around that land right there. See, I have a couple questions. Milo asked, did anybody live in the Spice Islands? Yes, many people lived in the Spice Islands. They were spice growers and traders, and all kinds of people lived there. Oh, how cool, Kyoshi, you're from India, but you live in New Jersey. How nice. Okay, great. So this is what Cabot thought he was going to do. So eventually, explorers realized that North and South America were not parts of Asia, and they had to get through them before they could get to Asia. When we go, I'm going to go a couple of slides back because I want to show you guys one other thing. So when we look at this map, so you'll notice they outlined where they wanted to go from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. But the truth is it's filled with ice for most of the part of the year, like very thick ice, which I have some pictures of after this. It actually took 300 years for the French and English to become convinced that it wasn't practical to go north and west to get to Asia. But as a result of this exploration, English and French people started to settle in the areas of what would become the eastern part of the US and Canada. So that actually was a result of the English and French trying this, was it actually brought many English and French people to these areas where they eventually settled. Okay, so we're gonna skip forward a couple slides, and I will try to answer some of your guys' questions. Let's see what we got. Arabella, great question. Weren't they able to get through once? Barely, because it had melted a little. Yes, there was a time that they were sort of able to get through. And Evan asked, weren't they also trying to find a river to get through America? Yes, but that came a little bit later. So this, I'll tell a little bit about some of the adventures having to do with the Northwest Passage. So this picture of this man on the right, his name is Henry Hudson, and he's an Englishman. And he was one of the many Englishmen and Frenchmen who were trying to find this passage. In 1607, he made the first of 4 voyages. In his last voyage, he made it to an area of the ocean in the north part of Canada that we now call Hudson Bay. So that bay, the part where he made it to on his last voyage, is named after him. Andrew, I can't see you when you're talking. If you want to ask me something, you have to type in a question. Yeah, I'm glad you've learned about him. He's a very interesting man. Aletta has a good question. How do we know all this if it happened so long ago? Well, part of history is the stories that get told about things, and they can either be written down, which in more modern history, you know, which I would consider this kind of more modern history, they would write things down, keep track of their voyages. On the boats, they had log books where they wrote the things that happened in them, but part of it is also passed from person to person, just sort of in a story way. But that's a great question. And that's one of the things to think about when you study history, is who is telling the story. So if it were Spain telling the story, let's say Christopher Columbus, about Christopher Columbus, they may tell a certain story because from their point of view, he is the founder of North America and he did all these different things. But it may, if you were telling it from a different point of view, you might say Henry Hudson was the beginning, you know, was the guy who was the beginning of the settlement of the United States, because he discovered Hudson Bay and he did all his voyages in that way. So that's an important thing to think of when you study history, is sort of who is telling your story. Ellie asked a great question. How is stuff from so long ago on the internet? Because they didn't have the internet back then. I think that what a lot of the things that are written about history on the internet are people who have done research or looked at those log books from the sailing ships, or looked at old pictures or paintings or things like that. And then they write about it. And in many, many places, they have ways that you can look at those things that they studied. That is a really great question. Okay, great. So this is the Hudson Bay. Now, Henry Hudson, in his final voyage, when he made it to the Hudson Bay, his ship actually got stuck in the sea ice because there is a lot of ice. Now, the crew had to spend the entire winter there on the frozen sea. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? I'm sure they were very unhappy and very cold, and probably didn't have as much of all the things they wanted as they needed. So this is a picture of that ship stuck in the ice. They spent all winter there. They were very unhappy. So the next summer, the ice melted enough to free the ship, but Hudson's crew mutinied, and that means they took over the ship. They were like, I'm in charge, we're in charge now, we're not gonna listen to the captain. They forced Hudson and his loyal followers into a small boat and left them behind. And they were never heard of again. So that is kind of a serious thing, right? That is true. Andrew says he was never found. He was never found. How do they know that's true? I think they have to just depend on what people wrote about it, letters that they wrote home, diaries that they wrote in. A lot of explorers or people who traveled kept really good notes about the things they saw and they did, because they wanted to be able to remember it, or they wanted to be able to write about it in the future and tell people who never traveled in those places what it was like. So I think that's how we can how we can know if it's true. How do we know what the people looks like? A lot of, Milo asks, a lot of the things that we depend on to know what the people looked like before there was cameras was paintings and drawings. And now it's not uncommon to have photos that your mom took or you took as a family or things like that up in your house. But before photography, the way that you would do it is someone would draw your picture or paint your picture. And so that you would have that as a way to remember those things. So we use a lot of those drawings and paintings as our way of knowing what happened in history. So even in the summer, there is just too much ice in the Arctic Ocean to make the Northwest Passage possible. So even at its warmest point, there's just too much ice for the ships to make their way through. Now, this picture to the right is a satellite picture. And so you can see why. This is actually from last summer, and all of that white is sea ice. So that is a lot of ice, even in the summertime. So it's hard without a special steel ship called icebreakers to get through the Northwest Passage. Aletta asks, how do we know what people wore? I think it's the same with drawings or paintings, but also the things that people have written about it. So all those things kind of help us create a picture in our mind of what we think these people looked like. There are also some old clothing that has been preserved. So sometimes if you go to a museum, you can see a display of old clothing from this time. Okay, I think I have Andrew. I think his crew did make it back. Maybe not all of them, but definitely some did. Okay, so let's see what's my next. Oh, so here is a picture of one of those icebreakers ships. So you can see these icebreaker ships have really strong engines. They have a really strong hull, or the bottom part of the boat. And they have a lot of strength so that they can push forward a lot to be able to break through that ice. So don't you think Henry Hudson would have been really happy to have this type of boat? Here's another one. This one is a Russian icebreaker ship named Yamal. It can crunch right through sea ice. So it just goes right through it. And then it doesn't have to worry about that thick ice. Lily asks, did anybody die on the ship? And Henry Hudson's voyage, I'm sure many of the people did, just because it was so cold, and it would be really, really hard. Do they break through the ice, or do they go over it? They break through the ice. So if we look back at this, oops, sorry guys. This one, you can see that it's actually, the boat is going through and breaking that ice. That was a great question. And how did they get those pictures? If you're talking about the pictures of the icebreakers, I think they're probably like from helicopters or a plane or something like that. Yes. Yes, the front end, the end and the front of the ship are sharp. That's a really great observation. Shravaya, I hope I said your name right, so that they can break through it. Yes, Darius, those boats are huge. They are ginormous. So there's another one. There is actually the first, this is a picture of a submarine. And one of the ways that they discovered they could travel the Northwest Passage was through a submarine under the ice. So this painting is done by a man named Albert Murray, and it's of the USS Nautilus, which is a submarine that went under the ice of the Northwest Passage in 1958. So it started in Alaska, it dived under the ice, and it went 1,000 miles under the ice to the North Pole. It went past the North Pole, and then it went to the country of Iceland. So that's actually really incredible. Soraya, thank you. Hopefully I said that right. How much do they weigh? I don't know how much they weigh, but they look like they weigh a huge, huge amount. Okay, guys, well, that is all the time I have for today. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you learned a little bit about Christopher Columbus and the Northwest Passage and the settlement of Europe. And I hope you will join me next time. Okay, bye.